All right, thank you so much. Good evening. My name is Terry Eichel, and I work with the Interreligious Eco-Justice Network, a faith-based environmental group in Connecticut. I am the executive director. Thank you for joining us for Clean Cars, Clean Trucks, and the Fight for Clean Air. IREGN works with religious communities throughout Connecticut on environmental issues. Every faith tradition speaks of the importance of caring for the planet and for helping those who are sick, poor, and oppressed. Over 20 years ago, we got our start around the issue of fossil fuel power plants that didn't meet modern emission standards. They were located in cities like Bridgeport, New Haven, and Montville. And these plants impacted the whole state, but especially the communities they were located in. We only wanted the plants brought up to modern emission standards just for sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide. It was such a fight. There was so much opposition and there was a lot of misinformation. So we're back here again talking about air pollution, air quality, and now climate change. And we're working with some of the same allies that we worked with all those years ago. So we wanted to present this webinar for two reasons. One, so that folks could learn about the proposed new emission standards for new cars and new trucks, which would begin in 2027. So tonight we'll hear about what's in the regulations and what isn't in the regulations. We'll also hear about the significant public health benefits to reducing pollution from transportation. And we will also hear the moral, ethical, and theological basis for addressing pollution and addressing climate change. The second reason that we wanted to present this webinar is to further educate people on the legislative process. These proposed emission standards were written in response to legislation that has already been passed. And it's very common that people think that the work is done once the governor signs a bill into law, but it's only one part of the process. We are now at this next step, which you will learn about tonight. So after the presentations, we will have a moderated question and answer session. So you can please put your questions in the chat and the Q&A. And our presenters are Charles Rothenberger, the climate and energy attorney from Save the Sound, Ruth Canovi, our director of advocacy from the American Lung Association, Deacon Art Miller from St. Mary's in Simsbury, and Father Bob Washabaugh from St. Mary's in Norwich. So I'm going to hand it over to Charles first, and I'm going to get back there so I can help him with his presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Terry. That was a great introduction. As Terry noted, my name is Charles Rothenberger. I'm a climate and energy attorney with Save the Sound, and really happy to be here and to see so many folks interested in the clean transportation transition that's underway. If you're here, then you're probably already aware that Connecticut is in the midst of adopting new vehicle standards for the state. And while they're new, these regulations really build on Connecticut's long-standing commitment to reducing the harmful effects of motor vehicle pollution on our residents and addressing climate change. These standards will apply more stringent emission requirements on gasoline and diesel cars and trucks, lowering the emission of harmful nitrogen oxides and particulate matter, while also continuing the current program's requirement on manufacturers to provide increasing numbers of zero-emission vehicles, including electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, and fuel cell vehicles to markets. Before we get into the specifics of those standards, though, it might be useful to take a look at the role that transportation plays in Connecticut when it comes to air quality and climate. Next slide, please. So adopting the proposed regulations is really necessary in order for Connecticut to meet its clean air goals and greenhouse gas reduction obligations. In Connecticut, the transportation sector accounts for approximately 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions. And you can see that in the blue shaded area of that pie chart to the left, and approximately 66% of emissions of nitrogen oxides. And those are the key components of ground level ozone or smog. And while medium and heavy duty vehicles in the state only account for 6% of the vehicles that we have on our roads, they're actually responsible for an outsized portion of this transportation pollution, about 25% of the climate emissions, and over half of those smog-forming emissions of nitrogen oxides. So that really underscores the importance of addressing that class of vehicles as well. And I know that the American Lung Association will be speaking after me, so I won't go into great detail, other than to say that Connecticut does suffer from some of the worst air quality in the nation, and we have consistently been designated by the federal government as being a non-attainment of the national ambient air quality standards for ozone. And cleaning up these emissions is particularly important for the health of low and moderate income populations living in our dense urban communities and along the state's major transportation corridors. Next slide, please. So a lot of text here, but I think it's important to establish the context of Connecticut's action in this regard. A lot of the criticism, perhaps, that one hears about adopting more stringent vehicle standards revolves around the fact that they were developed in California. And in fact, there is a very good reason for that. And California's leadership in this regard is actually part of the federal regulatory structure approved by Congress. California's authority to adopt its own independent motor vehicle emission standards is set forth in the Clean Air Act, Section 209. While generally states are prohibited from adopting their own vehicle emission standards, so Connecticut couldn't act independently, the Federal Clean Air Act expressly allows California, and only California, to adopt their own standards. And this is in recognition of the state's expertise and early leadership in addressing air quality issues through its regulation of vehicle emissions. Similarly, consistent with the clean up, thank you. There's a second provision there, Section 177 of the Clean Air Act. And that expressly allows any other state to piggyback on California's independent vehicle emission standards. Again, the federal government and Congress has recognized California's expertise in this area, the fact that they have generally gone above and beyond in addressing health impacts of vehicle pollution, and want other states, and in fact the nation, to be able to take advantage of those independent standards. So in proposing the current regulations, Connecticut is following the path that's set out by Congress through the Federal Clean Air Act. And in fact, this is a path that we've been on for more than 20 years, as we will discuss on the next slide. So moving from the federal structure to the state authority, as Terry alluded to at the top, as part of our efforts to improve air quality, Connecticut has a long history of following the California emission standards. The Connecticut General Assembly endorsed Connecticut's adoption of advanced clean car standards, including necessary updates to remain in alignment with those regulations when it passed Public Act 0484 in 2004, which requires DEEP to adopt California's light-duty vehicle emission standards and to update those regulations as necessary in order to maintain consistency with the California standards. And notably, this has historically included both the relevant zero-emission vehicle requirements and greenhouse gas components of such regulations. And these regulations, while adopted in 2004, have subsequently been updated in 2013 to reflect the evolution of the standards. Most recently, Public Act 2225, passed last year in 2022, expressly authorizes DEEP to adopt California's medium and heavy-duty vehicle standards, which is a little bit of a new area for Connecticut. We've been following the light-duty vehicle standards, but the General Assembly has authorized us to adopt the full suite of these standards. And I'll just point out the votes in the General Assembly that authorize these regulations. Back in 2004, nearly unanimous, only one dissenting vote. And for the medium and heavy duty vehicles, a little bit closer, but still overwhelmingly adopted by a 2-to-1 margin. Next slide. And while there's been a lot of focus on electric vehicles in the public discourse around these regulations, I think it's important for folks to know that what we're really talking about is a suite of 4 regulations, 2 regulations that relate to light-duty vehicles, 2 regulations that relate to medium and heavy-duty vehicles, and they apply standards both to traditional gasoline and diesel vehicles, improving the tailpipe emission standards for those vehicles, in addition to establishing the zero emission vehicle sales requirement, which is what you have heard about. Next slide, please. So this slide is really, and this is the zero emission vehicle regulation timeline for the light duty vehicles. The slide is really meant to illustrate how the pending regulations, which in California take effect in 2026, and Connecticut would not take effect until model year 2027, but how these regulations really build on the requirements of the existing program, which we adopted way back when. And it's important to point out as well that this program has been successful in supporting the market transition to clean vehicles and ensuring that vehicles are available to those consumers who wish to purchase them. There's no requirement to purchase them. This is a requirement solely on the manufacturers to provide increasing percentages of vehicles for sale. And a couple important things to remember about these regulations. One, as I noted, it's a manufacturer delivery requirement. It doesn't ban the use or sale of any internal combustion vehicle. It's not part of the program. And the definition of zero emission vehicle expressly includes plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, as well as full battery electric vehicles. So for folks who might be looking for a starter EV, those will certainly be available. And these regulations really align with where the industry is already headed. Every major manufacturer has already set forth targets for transitioning their production fleet from internal combustion vehicles to electric vehicles, some earlier than others, but generally within the 2030 to 2040 timeframe, you're going to see the majority of manufacturers producing the majority of their vehicles will be EVs. And that is in recognition of the really unprecedented growth in electric vehicles that we've seen in the United States. Last year, EV sales increased 55%, and in the first quarter of this year, they were up 60%. Here in Connecticut, you can see our 2025 target under our current program is about 8% in projected sales. And for the first half of this year, we're trending about 9.5%. So we're already over complying with the program requirements 3 years early. So for folks who say that this is impossible, not only is it possible, we are doing it. Next slide, please. This slide is really to underscore the fact that manufacturers have some compliance flexibility. So when we talk about 60% EV sales or 100% EV sales, what we're really talking about is sales as reflected in the credits that manufacturers receive. So you can see in this chart that different types of vehicles are eligible to earn varying amounts of credit. In the earlier program, vehicles could earn up to 4 credits per vehicle. That will be closer to a one-to-one relationship moving forward, but still opportunities for vehicles to meet certain standards and get additional compliance credits. And again, I think that third row is really important, that up to 20% of these credit requirements can be met with plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. So lots of flexibility for manufacturers, in addition to providing incentives for the manufacturers to improve the performance of their vehicles. You can see that in order to qualify as a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle under the new program, these vehicles will have to really improve their performance, going from a 10-mile electric standard for a plug-in hybrid to a minimum 70-mile standard for a plug-in hybrid electric. So guaranteeing better performance for Connecticut customers who are purchasing these vehicles. Next slide, please. And again, one of the things that you don't hear about these standards is that consumers will really benefit by being part of these California standards. In addition to the increased availability of electric vehicles and hybrid electric vehicles, there are incentives on the manufacturers to reduce the cost of vehicles they're providing to market. So I talked about compliance flexibility. Manufacturers get additional compliance credits if they're providing a low-cost electric vehicle to a community-based clean mobility program. They get additional compliance credits if they're offering low-cost EVs, defined as right around $20,000 for a car or $26,000 for a light truck, into these markets. And no surprise that as manufacturers are sharpening their pencils and looking at ways to produce these vehicles, they're going to be delivering them to the markets in which they can get extra compliance credits. Not Arizona, not North Dakota, but California, Massachusetts, New York, and hopefully Connecticut. Next slide, please. So this is a very busy slide. This is the traditional gas standards for your vehicles as we are increasing the number of zero-emission vehicles on our roads. We are also ensuring that the traditional internal combustion engine vehicles that we have on our roads get cleaner. There's a lot there. You don't need to understand it all. That complexity is really only something that the manufacturers need to deal with. Suffice it to say that manufacturers comply with these standards by certifying vehicles to various compliance bins, which are those rows. The new standards eliminate the dirtiest category, so that's no longer a compliance option. They establish a couple new cleaner bins, allowing more flexibility for manufacturers to certify cleaner vehicles. And as we anticipate more numbers of electric vehicles being part of this vehicle mix, it eliminates a provision that allowed electric vehicles to be averaged in to meet these standards. So these standards will now apply just to the internal combustion engines to prevent backsliding and to prevent vehicles on the traditional side from getting dirtier as we see increasing numbers of ZEVs in the marketplace. Next slide, please. So this is the Advanced Clean Truck Rule, the parallel to the Advanced Clean Cars. Again, simply demonstrating the compliance pathways for these medium and heavy duty vehicles, typically anything over 8,500 pounds, and you can see the class categories there. Again, you'll note a much slower ramp up than we had with clean cars, recognizing the fact that that market isn't quite as developed, although OEMs are producing a significant number of clean, medium, and heavy-duty vehicles. In 2022, there were nearly 840 models that were announced by manufacturers, and over 170 models of commercially available buses and trucks by North American manufacturers themselves. And worth noting in light of those numbers that these standards really represent a compromise with the medium and heavy duty vehicle manufacturers. They are supporting these regulations and feel confident that they can comply with them. Next slide, please. And again, as we are encouraging the development of more zero emission medium and heavy duty vehicles, we're also addressing tailpipe emissions from traditional diesel vehicles. So again, as part of that negotiation with the manufacturers, the heavy duty low NOx omnibus rule, as it's called, beginning with model year 2024, will provide about 75% reductions in nitrogen oxide emissions, which again are those smog-forming pollutants. So significant benefits to accrue to the citizens of Connecticut, which I'm sure Ruth will talk about. Next slide, please. I won't get into too much of this because I think Ruth will cover the benefits, but suffice it to say that there have been a number of independent reports highlighting both the public health, the air quality, and the economic benefits that will accrue to Connecticut should we be adopting this suite of enhanced motor vehicle standards. You can check out those reports. They're all online, and perhaps there'll be some questions afterward as well. Next slide, please. And I really like this slide because it really illustrates the fact that we are not doing this alone. We talked about the federal structure that allows and perhaps encourages other states to follow California's lead in adopting more health protective standards. And you can see, in fact, that there is a relatively large number of states that do that. They are currently in various stages of adopting the most recent round of regulations. It's hard to keep track because it seems like a new state raises its flag every day, but I believe currently 8 states have already adopted the Advanced Clean Cars standards, with 5 more along with Connecticut in the process. 8 states have already adopted the Advanced Clean Truck Rule, and you can see in both cases that involves all of our neighbors in New England and the Northeast. So we're really a little island of non-compliance there, which I hope we will remedy soon. And again, just looking at where that stands with respect to the market, those green shaded states represent more than 40% of light duty vehicle sales in the US and more than 25% of the heavy duty vehicle sales. So significant market impacts. For those who say Connecticut can't make a difference, we can make a difference because we're not operating in a vacuum. We're working in partnership and coordination with our regional neighbors, as well as some other extremely large states across the country. Next slide, please. So where are we? Connecticut has a very unique process where, even though, as we mentioned, the Connecticut General Assembly has expressly directed DEEP to adopt these standards, all regulations have to go back to a small subcommittee of the General Assembly called the Regulations Review Committee. That's made up of 14 members, 7 Democrats, 7 Republicans, who have to vet all proposed regulations for consistency with the agency's authority. It's important to underscore here that the Attorney General, as you see in this chart, has already given his thumbs up to these regulations, noting that they check all the boxes of legal sufficiency. We reviewed the federal and state statutes, giving DEEP the authority and indeed the necessity of adopting these. So the Regulation Review Committee really has a narrow scope of review for the regulations that come before it. Its sole job is to ensure that the regulations are within the authority of the agency to adopt, and that the regulations meet the statutory criteria and are technically accurate. And they will be meeting to determine that on November 28th, and they have a deadline for action of December 7th, after which, if there is no action on those regulations, they will automatically become effective. Next slide, please. And I don't know if we're doing questions now or waiting till the end, but happy to accommodate either. And if folks have other questions, there's a great link on the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection's website with a plethora of information and statistics. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much. That was great. I'm going to stop the share. We will do questions at the end. I have a couple, and there are some coming in, so that's terrific. Thank you so much, Charles. Now I'm going to have Ruth Canovi, who's the Director of Advocacy for the American Lung Association, do a presentation on the public health benefits of these new emission standards. Thank you so much, Charles.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we did a test to make sure I could share, and just bear with me when
Yes.
I'm doing this here.
Nothing
It's
like the
always
Zoom
different when it's in
technology.
practice, right? But I think that we should be.
There you go.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you, Charles. I feel like every time you speak, I learn something new. And so hopefully you all appreciated that as well. So my name is Ruth Canovi. I'm the Advocacy Director for the American Lung Association in Connecticut. And I really am grateful for the opportunity to speak with you all today to talk about air pollution in Connecticut, and the significant opportunity that we have here to improve our health and our air. So the Lung Association has released a report for the past 24 years on the state of our air. We look at data that's kind of accumulated by the states in conjunction with the EPA to look at two major pollutants, ozone pollution and particulate matter pollution. And we do this, one, because we want people to know what's happening with the air that we breathe, and how to protect their health, and then also to help move policy to improve the quality of the air that we breathe. But just so kind of we're all on the same page and talking about the same things, because we kind of sometimes throw these words around a lot, but particle pollution is a mixture of tiny solid and liquid particles, and it's called soot. I think people are more familiar with that terminology of soot. But I remember when I was learning about this, just being surprised at how tiny we're talking about. And so when we're looking at this, we're talking about the particle pollution 2.5 is something that's less than 2.5 microns. For like just comparison, human hair is 50 to 70 microns. So these are tiny, tiny, tiny little particles that come from driving, like one, combustion, but also like what comes off tires and wear and tear when people are driving. Things like burning, well, combustion of any sort, really. And so what happens is they get lodged into our lungs, and then also like our bloodstream. They can be very dangerous. The World Health Organization has classified them as carcinogens. So I'll get into that a little bit more, but just want to make sure kind of we're all on the same page when we're talking about particulate matter. These really are tiny, tiny particles that are pretty dangerous, well, very dangerous for our health. And so ozone pollution, I think Charles did a good job prefacing this, but smog, right? I think, again, soot and smog, we use the particulate matter and ozone pollution. But when we talk about ozone, it's not like ozone is emitted from tailpipes. It's really what happens when volatile organic compounds or nitrogen oxides kind of have a chemical reaction with sun and heat to create this ozone molecule. And again, that's I feel like sometimes people are confused, because if they were around during like the 1980s or 90s, they're like, isn't ozone good? That was when we were talking about the ozone layer in that kind of very high level of our atmosphere to protect us. But this is not something that we want to be breathing in. I've had doctors and health professionals that I work with kind of compare breathing in ozone as like the damage that it does almost as like a sunburn of the lung. Not something that we want to be breathing at all. And one thing that's going to be trickier, and I'll kind of mention this a few times, I think, throughout the presentation, is that as the climate warms, we're going to have hotter days. And so it is why it is so important for us to clean up these emissions, because we'll be kind of having more ozone with fewer emissions. So this is a really important opportunity that we have now to clean up the air that we breathe, to reduce those kind of ingredients for ozone that we have control over. So I'm just going through here. I always have my notes, but air pollution can harm children and adults in many ways. Premature death from that, to wheezing and coughing, exacerbating asthma attacks, worsening chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, lung cancer, heart attacks and strokes. I was just at a conference last week where a researcher was talking about the really huge significant links between air pollution and heart attacks as well. So these are not pollutants that we want to be breathing in. So in our state of the air this year, we found that 120 million Americans living in communities impacted by unhealthy levels of ozone and particle pollution. And decades of peer-reviewed literature kind of highlights those health impacts that we said. But we also know that the burdens of poor air quality don't fall equally. In fact, we know that there are major disparities in terms of who is breathing in the worst air pollution. In this year's report, when we kind of looked at national numbers, we saw that people of color were 64% more likely to live in a county with a failing grade for at least one of these pollutants, and 3.7 times more likely to live in a county with 3 failing grades. So that's 2 different measures of particle pollution, and then that for smog. And so we also know that these are kind of broad over, looking at county levels, but there are some very specific air monitoring that can be done in neighborhood levels that's really important to do as well. So that's kind of big picture. How does Connecticut fare? And again, Charles did a good job of previewing this. But ozone pollution, we have the worst ozone pollution in the eastern half of the country. Half of our counties earned an F in the most recent report of the State of the Air report. And Fairfield County is the only county east of the Mississippi that is kind of ranked in our top 25 polluted counties for ozone in the country. It's not a place that we want to be, and it's a place that we need to do some work. And then particle pollution. Overall, since I've been doing this work for about a decade, we haven't had a failing grade for particle pollution that I know of. We are getting more grades. You'll also see that there's only 5 counties with grades here. We're increasing the monitoring that's being done in Connecticut and these other counties, but it's also worsening. And that's a trend that we're seeing throughout the country. I'll note that this report includes data from like a 3-year compilation, and it certainly does not include what happened over the summer, but that trend of those intense days of pretty dangerous wildfire smoke exposure is something that we're going to continue to see, and that's a trend that we're seeing as climate is changing and we're seeing more fires and that impact there. So I gave that kind of overview and looking at what the health impacts could be, but there are certainly people who are at higher risk for poor health outcomes when we're expecting poor air quality days. And so just kind of flagging, I feel like people talk a lot about asthma. And so in Connecticut, 10.5% of adults have asthma. 8.9% of kids in Connecticut have asthma. The average is 6.6. And when you look at the disparities around racial demographics and income demographics, it's significant. There was a big report that the Department of Public Health put together, and they looked at the state's 5 largest cities, Bridgeport, Hartford, New Haven, Stamford, and Waterbury. It represents about 18% of Connecticut's total population, and they account for nearly half of that total healthcare costs for asthma. And there's a lot of issues with that. And I know there's a lot of healthcare disparities as well that play into this, where sometimes people don't have their asthma controlled, but this is not significant. This is significant, and it's not a mistake either. And so we're going to get into that in just a second. But the other thing that I just wanted to highlight here was that there was a report, it was done in 2016. So we're looking for some additional data, but it was stark, and it found that more people in Connecticut die each year as a result of air pollution than any other New England state. Again, when we're talking about the quality of the air we breathe, not surprising, but it found that 168 people in Connecticut die from air pollution, which is significant. I think sometimes people are surprised, or they think, oh, it's fine, but these are very real and concerning health issues. And so we can do a lot to improve the quality of the air we breathe, and therefore the health of our residents. And so again, just kind of underscoring, this isn't just the Lung Association saying this. There's been a lot of very smart people who have done very sophisticated studies on the links between transportation pollution specifically and health. So with a high level of confidence, the Health Effects Institute found strong connections exist between traffic-related air pollution and early death due to cardiovascular diseases. They also found strong links with lung cancer mortality, asthma onset in children and adults, and acute lower respiratory infections in children. And again, we know because of many systems, institutional prejudices and isms in our society, it's no accident that people don't live and breathe these impacts the same. I'm just underscoring here the EPA's report about 72 million Americans who live in America live near truck freight routes. So residents of these communities are more likely to be from the BIPOC communities as well. So really concerned about the disparate rates that people are exposed to these dangerous health pollutants as well. Charles shared this slide as well. But just kind of, again, providing some context as why we're talking about this. Connecticut's not on track to meet our long-term statutory greenhouse gas emissions goals. And a big participant or reason that we're talking about this today is transportation. So the Lung Association has been producing this report around state of the air for 24 years. And again, we want to do this so that people recognize the health risks to them and pay attention to the quality of the air. I think meteorologists have started doing a good job when it looks like we're going to have high ozone days. But we also want to talk about some solutions. And so as we were seeing kind of a change in the transportation system, as my colleagues in California were working on some of these new standards and seeing just the market respond to the interest in electric vehicles as well, we look to kind of assess the benefits of shifting away from combustion and polluting vehicles and fuels. And so we published a report titled Zeroing In on Healthy Air in March of 2022. And then 2 reports followed that over the past year, looking at different things. But this slide basically shows what we assumed for the transition to 100% zero emission vehicles, sales of passenger cars by 2035, and for all medium and heavy duty trucks no later than 2040. We also include the benefits of a national power grid with no combustion resources in kind of looking at these pieces. It was inspired by the administration's call for a decarbonized grid. We've adjusted that to eliminate any combustion resources. Results were produced on a cumulative basis between 2020 and 2050 using kind of a range of EPA and other modeling tools. So there was a number of folks who worked hard on this, kind of looking at what we'd be looking at. We know what the state of our air is now, but what would we look at if we did transitions like the advanced clean cars to and advanced clean trucks? So nationally, the results of increasing zero emission cars, schools, and transit buses, medium and heavy duty vehicle deployments, and shifting to a non-combustion grid are staggering. We estimate over $1.2 trillion in public health benefits. It's cumulative estimate, and we said, but it equates to 110,000 premature deaths avoided, nearly 3 million asthma attacks, and over 13 million lost work days avoided due to less pollution from transportation and electricity sectors. One important note, these are cumulative benefits, so we talked about that already. So what does that look like for Connecticut? $13 billion, 1,250 premature deaths, 27,400 asthma attacks avoided, and 143,000 lost work days avoided. This is significant. And so again, this is modeling, looking at this, but we certainly recognize that in Connecticut, we have some of the worst air quality in the eastern half of the country. It really does have a significant impact on our residents and our public health. So at the Lung Association, again, we produce these reports because we want the public to know about the air quality and how it impacts our health. And we want everyone to be able to do all that they can to protect our health. So talking about when we know that there's going to be poor air ozone, trying to stay indoors if you can. Don't exercise outdoors, again, if you can. But we also want to improve the quality of the air that we breathe. Our neighbors are adopting these regulations, as we saw, and Connecticut's closely involved in all of the work that California has been doing. Air quality is impacting us now. Climate change, really, I see it as the biggest public health issue we face today. As the climate warms, it's going to be harder to protect people from ozone and particulate matter pollution. At the Lung Association, we often say, when you can't breathe, nothing else matters. We all breathe. We all need access to healthy air. We've heard so much in the past 3 years, especially about health equity. We really need to take the lead from our neighbors here and do what's right and clean up the air that we breathe. Sometimes I talk about these issues and I think about the saying, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago and the second best time is today. The best time to take climate, and public health action was 20 years ago. And really, we did that with the first advanced clean cars. The second best time is today, and we really need to take action. So I have this little QR code up here. I think if you're involved, you've probably engaged with some of your lawmakers, but the Lung Association has a action up right now that if you want to contact people who are making these decisions or their colleagues to let them know that we care about the health of our families, friends, and neighbors and communities, you can do that. And so you can take a little picture of that. That's available, or we can follow up. But I hope that was kind of a level set of the kind of where we're at with the air that we breathe, why we care, and one of the things that we can do about it. And the Lung Association is working on a lot of other areas, not just in Connecticut, but throughout the country to improve the quality of the air that we breathe. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you all today. Really appreciate it and look forward to talking with you and continuing this conversation.
Thank you so much, Ruth. That was great. That was super informative, and I think it's actually a perfect segue. Our next speaker is Deacon Art Miller, who is a nationally known author and speaker. He was a former director of the Office for Black Catholic Ministries for the Archdiocese of Hartford. He's currently the deacon at St. Mary's Church in Simsbury. He's a resident of Windsor. He's an amazing human being. Nationally known civil rights activist, and so he's gonna just give us some faith-based perspective on why this is important.
Terry, thank you. It's one of the things that is most and so encouraging is to see the number of people who've decided that this was important enough a moment to join us. I am not surprised at what Charles and Ruth were saying, because the reality is our impoverished communities, which are normally people of color, suffer the most in these times of pollution and degradation and all of those things that continuously beset the poor. And from the books of Exodus, it tells us in the Hebrew text that we are to care for the poor, that God gets completely upset when we aren't about the business of caring for the poor. And the Quran 9:10, the Islamic people too call for the care of the poor as if they were ourselves. And in the Christian scripture passages, time and time again, Christ has this profound affinity for the poor. And we who many call ourselves believers, believe as long as it doesn't cost us too much, as long as we're not made to be uncomfortable. When the truth is, our comfort is not what's important. It is the comfort of all of us. We are not about the business of self-salvation. It's about the salvation of the world. And we must not ever stand idly by while the pervasive and profound assault on our common home this earth, as quoted by Pope Francis, that this pollution and terrible assault in our communities through the air continues to saunter about under the guise of false truths uttered by unknowing and uncaring political leaders, whose desire for political and economic power has jaundiced their sensibilities. Yeah, it's vital that every good and heroic person stand against the degradation and squandering of the natural resources that make our planet precious. We must continue to voice the undesirable and uncomfortable truth that greed, indifference, and ignorance, and social elitism are destroying our common home and God's very first creation. Today I had mentioned that there are over 80 people here, and your presence speaks to your accepted invitation to the rescue of Mother Earth, our common home. And it will take your personal commitment today, because there's much work to be done. There are many, many, many minds that need to be changed. I was reading under the questions where someone had received a note from their state representative, concerned about the cost of what these new vehicles will cost if they are made only through electricity. How will that impact those who can't afford electrical cars? Well, these are new cars, and the more new cars, the more that is being produced, the lesser and lesser the price will be. We have to do something. Standing by is not working. There are a lot of minds that need to be changed, and uncaring attitudes to be rectified, and destructive actions that we must confront. There are many powerful people continue to believe that climate change is a hoax. They believe that the warming of our planet, the disintegration of the polar ice cap, and believe the dramatic swings in weather patterns is a normal cycle that our planet is going through and has gone through for millions of years. And they don't even believe that it is said that 97% of every notable scientist, including 17 Nobel laureates, report that climate change is real, and that human activity has played a significant role in these unnatural climate changing patterns. If there's 97% of scientists believe that there's this truth, I wonder who those 3% of the scientists are. Boy, they sure can influence those who steadfastly believe that climate change is not real. I wish those 3% could influence some of these politicians who believe that there is no racism. I wish those 3% could influence those hardliners that Black lives do matter, poor lives matter, Hispanic lives matter. I wish those 3% could influence people to go back to church or to the temple or to mosque. I wish those 3% could influence the richest of the rich to pay their fair wages to those they employ. I wish those 3% would convince some people to get a damn vaccination. I remember the struggle for civil rights. I'm an old man. I'm 78 years old. 1963, I had 17, turning on 18, and I went to jail because Dr. King called us to a reality that our country was in trouble, that it wasn't living up to what we all had expected of it, that its very foundation was a lie, that all people were not created equal. And I responded, and I was put in jail. One of the proudest moments of my life. I remember the determination and bravery to achieve those hard-won concessions for social justice, and now we struggle for an even greater challenge, the challenge to preserve our very planet, to preserve our common homes, that our children and our grandchildren and those who follow might be able to walk through verdant fields, breathe sweet, clean air, know that what God created, we did not destroy. You know, at the same time, I realize there are those who are blind to the truth that is blindingly obvious to us. I'm aware that we become a society that sweeps into the corner any difficult truth that threatens to shake us out of our apathy. For so many good people just stand by, refusing to accept what screams so very loudly: our planet is sick. Our very planet is sick, and we are the ones poisoning her. You know, what is it? Edmund Burke, I think, the German philosopher, once said that in order for evil to prevail, all it takes is for good people to do nothing. We are the inhabitants of this beautiful planet. We don't own it. We're part-time keepers of it. We must look truthfully at what is happening and not worry so much about who is right but about what is right. We must stay informed so that we can transform those who don't understand into people who do understand, so that they can be transformed. And that requires that there be a change. And this change must cause you to act. And I mean every single day. I'm not talking about tonight. I'm talking about from now on. And you might be asking, what can you do so that the world will take notice and accept the truth of our duplicity and the terrifying changes to our climate? What can I do so that biblical floods and ravaging winds awaken the minds of those who are afraid of the truth? What can I do so all humankind takes notice that global droughts and rising seas are destroying the lives of millions of people, animals, and plants? I come to say to you tonight, however difficult the moment, however frustrating the hour, there's much that you can do, because truth crushed to earth will rise again. What can you do? Take a stronger stand today. Speak truth to power, because no lie can live forever. What can you do? Act now. Act through Snapchat and Facebook and all those other things your grandchildren and my grandchildren talk about. X, what used to be Twitter, LinkedIn, all them things. Voicing your concerns and outrage at the duplicity of our leaders and our neighbors and some of our relatives. What can you do? Join this organization and others so that their voice is more powerful. Then go out and recruit others. What can you do? Love your planet and our common home. This is the question humankind has to face when its moral truths confront its amoral reality. These questions of justice wronged and righteousness denied must be taken up again today, but their veracity can no longer be ignored. You see, I believe with all my heart that there is an 11th commandment. And it says, thou shalt not be a bystander. You know, and after reflecting on my own moments of tragic silence, I've come to realize, for me, it is the height of arrogance to lament the fact that my solitary voice might not be heard, and so I don't do anything because no one hears me. I have come to accept that. Why is it necessary for me to want my voice to be heard above the sea of others? All I have to know is that I have done my small part, and that in doing that small part, I've done the best that I can do. And that has got to be enough. There's a Catholic cardinal. who was murdered in Nicaragua, I think. What he said was, we accomplish in our lifetime only a tiny fraction of the magnificent enterprise that is God's work. Nothing we do is complete, which is another way of saying that the kingdom of God always lies beyond us. No statement says no statement says all that could be said. No prayer fully expresses our faith. No confession brings perfection. No pastoral visit brings complete wholeness. No program accomplishes the church's mission. No set of goals and objectives includes everything. This is what we are all about. We plant seeds that one day will grow. We water seeds already planted, trusting that they hold future promise. So you and I must go out and do all that we can every day, that we can every moment that we can, so that our children will inherit the world that they deserve. And pray that they can fix what we broke, that they can accomplish what we didn't. That's all that we ask. Do your part.
Thank you so much, Deacon Art. So if anyone, it's so funny, I was actually just looking up what he just quoted was, I think it's called Ode to Bishop Romero, who was killed in South America. It's a beautiful, beautiful prayer written for him by a young priest, and it's really encompasses what people of faith do, which is the work is a lifelong journey. You know, it is not done. And faith-based environmentalism is a lot like that. You are constantly being able to reflect and show your faith tradition in your everyday actions, but also understanding that the work is never finished.
Yeah.
So I just want to,
if I could say one last thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Our conversion never ends.
Mm.
We are always, every day, being converted. Every moment of every day, to be better tomorrow than we are today. And I thank you, Terry, for allowing me to speak.
Thank you for joining us. That was so powerful. And so our final speaker is Father Bob Washabaugh, who is the priest at St. Mary's Catholic Church in Norwich, which is a historic church in Norwich with a large population, serves a lot of different folks. Before that, he was with a church in New London. Oh, I apologize. I'm blanking on his church in New London. As a parish.
St. Mary's.
Oh, St. Mary's. I thought it was St. Mary's, and then I thought, no, it couldn't possibly be.
Yeah,
I met Father Bob about a year and a half ago, and I was so impressed by his passion and concern for the planet and for climate change. And I wanted to invite him to say some words about our responsibility, and also because the Pope has just released his follow-up to the Laudate Si, which is called the Laudate Deum, and that just came out just a few weeks ago. So, Father Bob.
Thanks, Terry. My picture isn't up. I don't know what I'm doing that prevented that, but you have my audio, I guess, is what you have.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Fine, that's just fine, probably for everybody. In the entertainment business, nobody wants to go on stage after somebody just tore the house down and got everybody's attention. And I'd like to thank you, Art, for that very impassioned and thoughtful sharing that you did. That it did it for me. I just don't want to take anything away from it. So thanks an awful lot. So I'm going to do it in a different tenor and probably go at it in a different direction and not take a whole lot of time either. The question is there any theological perspective on this? And I would say, from what I understand about theology, is the only thing is that what science tells us and common sense is theology enough. what I mean is Christianity at its best embraces science. It's not, we have faith and it doesn't pay any attention to what science knows, what technology and research has discovered. We listen to it. And so if there's something being told that's so remarkably and strongly grabbing, we don't need to add a lot else onto it. We need to embrace it. What makes, to me, the role of religion in all of this very important is something that actually Pope Francis said in his most recent encyclical, that the thing that came out October 4th, Laudato Deum. It's his follow-up to Laudato Si of 2016, where he said, you got to admit, we can all admit that individual efforts isn't going to make the change. It's large actors, corporations and international bodies and governments that have to make those decisions, that have to make those changes. But all of those changes that the big players make are dependent upon the shaping of a culture. And that's what religion does. That's what we really are recognized needs to happen. Our small efforts push the culture in a certain way. Everything that we do, as Art was saying, every argument we make, every letter or message we send out is going to shape the culture. And as people start to catch on, then they become a force that pushes the large players in the right direction. So if religion doesn't talk about this, religion which shapes culture, religion is not doing its job. Okay, so this is just a little bit about some of the history that I would think would be worth mentioning, not getting into a whole big long thing about. Something really remarkable happened in the Catholic world, at least, towards the end of the 19th century. Pope Leo XIII issued an encyclical, and an encyclical is a formal letter. It's considered the highest form of teaching, most authentic form of teaching in the Catholic Church. It was called Rerum Novarum, about new things. And what he was talking about is the Industrial Revolution and how it changes everything. When we think of the Industrial Revolution, we can also think of how it changes carbon emissions, for one thing. But he was talking about labor relations in particular, owners and workers. And he was giving a take on it in which he was saying that concern for the dignity of each person, the concern, the radical equality that we have if we believe in a God that makes us all equally children of God and therefore brothers and sisters of one another, then workers have rights and owners don't simply have the right to pay whatever wage they choose and take any action that they prefer. They have to pay attention to the rights of workers, and if they don't, workers have every right to organize and to do what they need to do in order to claim those rights. And so, interestingly, the Catholic social teaching embraced labor organizing and that labor movement that was transformative talk about, again, how a culture can change reality. Organized labor was one of those moments in history that did that, and continues to do that, and continues to work it towards that. It's gone on more difficult times more recently with neoconservative economies, but it's still there. The follow through was to say that faith needs to engage with all the issues that have come down the line, and this series of Catholic teachings embraces a certain number of principles. Principles such as I said, the life and dignity of each human person. A principle such as an option for the poor and the vulnerable. Solidarity of all people, and of course the care of creation. And this is me wrapping up. Pope Francis isn't just some innovator that's come along the line and says, I'm going to pick ecology and climate change as my issue. It's been a strong issue in church teaching for a long time. And it's, again, one of those Cassandra kind of things where it's talked about, it's forcefully presented, and it seems to not get the response that you would expect. Back in 1971, Pope Paul VI issued an apostolic letter that was pretty forceful. Here's one of just a quote from it. In 1971, he says, already we see the pollution of the air we breathe, the water we drink. We see the pollution of rivers, lakes, even oceans, to the point of inspiring fear of a true biological death in the near future, if energetic measures are not immediately and courageously taken and rigorously put into practice. After Paul VI, John Paul II picked up that theme and spoke in a lot of different occasions, inviting and calling the human community to be concerned about climate change. After him, Pope Benedict, who and sometimes was referred to as the Green Pope, also issued strong messages calling on this change. The most significant, without doubt, was in 2016 when Pope Francis issued Laudato Si, right at the time of the Paris Accords. He, of course, was very influential in pushing the international community towards making the Paris Accords. And now he's doing a bit of an evaluation and saying we're coming up short. The Paris Accords were good. We're not meeting our goals. We're not taking them seriously. The world has to dig much deeper, and we all have to push much harder. So that, to me, and by the way, he's saying that the number one moral issue, the first and most significant moral issue of our time, is this one. It's what we do about climate change. So that said, we have our work cut out for us. Time to work on recreating the culture and pushing us all in that direction. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Father Bob. So that was great. Thank you so much. And it's funny, you touched on something that I sort of always tell folks when I'm talking about why IREJN does this work. sometimes people say, well, why faith community on environmental issues? And I would say, well, the faith community is already addressing environmental issues. We respond to extreme weather disasters by raising money for people who are affected by hurricanes and floods and wildfires. We help people who are sick. We're responding to people in our community that are suffering. When someone comes to the doors of a religious institution or house of worship saying they can't pay their bills, most faith communities have something that we call like the fellowship fund or something like that, where you can actually get some funds to help pay bills. So, religious communities are already doing this work. We're planting community gardens to help people get fresh produce. So now, by doing this on this environmental, from the starting point, we can address the actual root cause of some of these inequities, these injustices, and these challenges that we're facing today. So, but I wanted to bring our panels back for Q&A. I could see that some of the questions were actually getting answered in the Q&A, but I wanted to highlight some of them. Let's see here. So, let's see here. Laura wanted to hear a little bit more about the consumer protections in the regulations. So I don't know if Charles, could you comment a little bit more on the consumer protections?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question. Happy to respond to some of the other questions live that we may have done in the chat as well. But no, thank you for the question. One of the things that I think has been set up in the debate around these regulations is that it's a choice between electric vehicles or internal combustion vehicles. And first of all, that's not true. Even if we were to default to the federal standards, the federal EPA standards are also going to require increasing numbers of electric vehicles in order to meet more stringent tailpipe emissions standards. So the market is moving towards EVs. The federal regulations will require them. The state-based regulations will require them. So it's not a choice of either or. However, one of the things that the state-based regulations provide that, as far as I know, the federal default regulations don't, are better consumer protections. And I think I mentioned during the presentation that the standards have incentives, non-cash incentives, for the manufacturers to provide more low-cost electric vehicles into the participating jurisdictions, so making electric vehicles more affordable for everybody. Secondly, they also require the manufacturers to provide enhanced warranty for those vehicles. The drivetrains, enhanced warranties for the batteries, better service information so that independent service shops can also work on your electric vehicle. You don't necessarily have to go to the dealership. And then finally, specific battery labeling requirements. Yes, electric vehicle batteries can be recycled. They are currently being recycled, and some of the requirements associated with these regulations will make it easier to do that as well. So, from my perspective, it's really a win-win for consumers opting into these state-based regulations. There is no downside, but thank you for the opportunity.
And actually, I saw something go on a slide, and I saw it in the article about farm machinery tractors. And it looked like, so one of the concerns that was raised in the article was people saying, well, I can't do electric or zero emission tractors, but it looked like the tractors provided by manufacturers were actually 40%. So they were still going, for any farmer who still wants a gas powered tractor, they're going to have a lot of range. Can you talk a little bit about the farm aspect? Because I live out in Eastern Connecticut, and I know that's a question people have.
Sure. Well, I have no doubt that we'll start seeing more electric-powered farm equipment in the future, but these regulations do not apply to sort of that heavy farm equipment. They only apply to on-road vehicles.
Okay.
So
The Connecticut proposed regulations don't actually include farm vehicles at all.
Not ones that I guess you would classify as specialized farm vehicles
Right.
that are primarily for off-road use. If you have a pickup truck, then yes. Although again, doesn't prohibit you from using your gasoline or diesel powered truck if that's what you choose. There's no prohibition or ban associated with these.
Okay. Okay, great. That's a really good point to make. And actually, back to the legislative process. So I wanted to highlight for folks, these regulations are a response to these bills that have been passed that have had, opportunity. They've gone through committees, people have testified, submitted comment, the House voted, the Senate voted, then the governor signed it into law. So the Regulation Review Committee, their role is only to look at these regulations to see if they are legally compliant with the legislation that called for them in the first place. So they're not supposed to be looking at the regulations from a policy, do I like this standpoint?
That's right. I mean, I think you've heard a lot in the debate about regulatory agencies run amok. And I think that's really what the Regulations Review Committee was put in place to guard against, was an administration, a regulatory agency going outside the four corners of its authority that was provided by the General Assembly to pass regulations, really a safeguard. I think as we saw during the presentation, there's clear authority, in fact, a mandate on the part of the agency to promulgate exactly the regulations that they did.
Great. All right, let me get back into the. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and again, when you look at those numbers, right, 2004, nearly unanimous, only one dissenting voice. The idea that 7 legislators or 8 legislators could overturn a statute that was passed unanimously defies common sense.
Diane wanted to know if the regulations are going to apply to motorcycles in any way.
That is a great question, and I do not believe that motorcycles are included under the category of light-duty vehicles. I will stand to be corrected if that is the case, but I don't believe so.
Let's see here. Let's try that. Let's see here. So I guess someone asked a question about. So I'm getting some of these questions are paragraphs. So one of the arguments is that Connecticut's not ready with the grid and the infrastructure. What's the response there?
Well, we're getting ready. I mean, we have to be as ready as we need to be to meet demand at the moment. So we don't need to have the entire grid built out. We don't need to have tens of thousands of EV charging stations today. Today, we have the infrastructure and the charging infrastructure to meet the demand that we have. And the Connecticut Public Utilities Regulatory Authority and the General Assembly and Congress and the federal government are all working together to build out that infrastructure. So we all know where we're headed. We all know where we need to be, and we are taking those steps commensurate as demand grows. So we do need to get there, but we don't need to get there tomorrow.
Great. And so Elizabeth actually asked, has experience shown that the Regulatory Review Committee process stays on track to review only the legal compliancy? Do you think advocates should still be putting forward support?
I don't want to dominate the conversation. If somebody else wants to jump in, I have my thoughts, but.
I would say certainly make the phone calls and let people know that this is happening, because people who are concerned about this are also making those phone calls. So we need to make sure that lawmakers hear from people who support these regulations, even the ones who we think like are for sure in our camp, to make sure that they know that there's a lot of support behind this. And for that other piece, the question, I mean, I haven't seen too much of that, and I've heard lawmakers even, talk to this point that there's been laws that have passed that they voted no on, but in the Regs Review Committee have voted to pass that. And so again, there's sometimes back and forth, of like questions on, well, is this detail, little details, but kind of overall policy space. I personally have not seen that, but I'm not at every Regs Review Committee, so I'll just kind of put that there. And please, Charles, if you have more to add, I'm welcome that.
No, I think that's entirely true, Ruth. It's not uncommon for the Regulations Review Committee to do what's called rejecting without prejudice, which sends a regulation back to the agency to correct some technical issue or deficiency that they've identified. But then it's anticipated that that regulation will come back to the committee once that's corrected, and it will pass. But again, I wouldn't take anything for granted. So if you are concerned and supportive, I would contact your legislator or the members of the committee.
Exactly. And part of the reason we wanted to do this webinar was to sort of highlight this piece of the process, because it's a seemingly small detail that actually has quite a big say in how we move forward. And actually, could you talk, I mean, if the regulations don't pass in November, that sets us back at least a year in terms of adopting these, correct?
Yes, thanks. The timing is really important here. So if they don't pass, they have to go back to the legislature for the legislature to basically reaffirm its intention. We will lose a year on the front end of these regulations. And even folks who might have concerns about the out years, whether we can actually meet those targets, nobody has any concerns about the early years of the program. And that's what we would be sacrificing, those environmental and public health benefits in year one. I should also point out that because of the way that the federal law is structured, there's a 2-year window from the time that Connecticut adopts the regulation to the time that it goes into effect. So the legislature, just by a matter of course, has a 2-year window to revisit and address the regulations, should they so choose. There's no need for the Regulations Review Committee to take it upon themselves to make that decision for the General Assembly.
Thank you. So let's see here. Any other questions that are... So Jean and Diane wanted to know, can we afford not to do this? Will we not have to pay the health and environmental damage that will result from doing nothing? Exactly. So, I mean, and can you talk a little bit about the cost of combustion engines to electric vehicles? I don't know if anyone else owns an electric vehicle, but I do, and it was a very affordable to buy and extremely affordable to maintain. It needs almost nothing, and we charge it at home, which is much less than gas has been. So one of the things that I saw during the public hearing was this sort of steady commentary from opposition that electric vehicles were all $85,000 or something. It's a very high number, and it's just not true. It's not even close to true, not even close to half true. So so can we talk about, Jean wanted to know, can we afford not to do this? And actually, conversely, are there any numbers, Ruth, and no pressure if there aren't, but are there numbers about what it looks like if we don't do this? Like if we don't put it in place? Because we know the cumulative health benefits if we do, but
I don't have them off the top of my head, but I know that we're spending a ton of money on, right? Like even just looking at those like asthma emergency visits that people are experiencing. And never mind, I mean, I'm speaking about kind of the air pollution piece. I'm also in a course right now where I'm looking at lots of the other public health issues, and they're significant and scary. And so I would certainly advocate that we cannot afford not to take action, fiscally, financially, but, also morally, and kind of for the future of our health and continuation. And so, yes, I mean, I can work and follow up on that, but we spend a lot on healthcare costs. We know that these things are impacting people's health. And so I would certainly advocate that we can't afford not to take action now.
There are some folks have some questions. This is being recorded. The recording will be provided, and we can also send you names and contact information for the folks on the regulation review committee. Even if they're, if they're yours, even better. Just encourage them. Obviously, we're a faith-based group, so we always encourage folks to be nice and polite, but very clear, firm. And if you attend a house of worship in their district, let them know. I like the fact when folks know that the religious communities are getting involved and talking about this and lifting this up. Let's see here. Any other questions that need to be answered? So actually, yeah, Bill said, if there's time, another question for Charles. Can Connecticut file lawsuit against other states for pollution that originates in other states but enters Connecticut?
I would say that Connecticut has certainly sued other states, and there's a lot of things happening right now. Like there's an update to the Good Neighbor rule with the EPA that's looking at what other states are doing, and they need to put pollution controls in place that will improve the quality of the air that we breathe. So again, this is one thing that we need to do, and it's a very important thing, the advanced clean cars and advanced clean trucks, but there's a lot of other pieces. And so that's an important question, right? Connecticut, we do get pollution from other states. Air pollution doesn't recognize state boundaries, but we need to do all that we can in our state. And in addition, the state has sued other entities to improve the quality of the air that we breathe, and EPA is taking action. There's a lot being done in a number of states to reduce emissions as well.
Diane had a question. What is the average amount of time does it take to charge an EV? That depends on the type of charger you're using. If you're using a home charger, sort of the, I guess, what level ones, they're definitely slower, and you sort of charge them overnight. You got to think about it, make sure you plan. There's a level 2 that's much faster. It's basically 10% of a charge for every 10 minutes. So again, it's not super fast, but what I do if I'm driving to Hartford and I feel like I need to charge, which I can get from Preston to Hartford on one charge, no problem, never had an issue. But if I do need to charge, then I'll stop at a place near Whole Foods, or, it's in Glastonbury, and I can do a little grocery shopping while it charges, and that's fine. And I heard there's another class of chargers that's even faster. And then you really get into like, okay, we could just stop really quickly and charge. The problem is for me is that right now that we do need more chargers. We do need more opportunities for people to actually charge when they're on the go. But that to me is something also that is part of the entire plan to move to electric vehicle infrastructure. So for me, when people say, oh, we don't have the infrastructure to charge electric vehicles, that's a little bit of a straw man argument, because if we just created the infrastructure, we'd be fine. We can definitely get that done. It's not impossible. They put it in my garage, no problem. So, it's not this insurmountable task. But right now, overnight is what you generally have in your home. It's 10% an hour, so.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's also a matter of how much of a charge you need, right? I think as electric vehicles become more prevalent, we're going to get more used to thinking differently about how we fuel up our vehicle. We don't have to top it off every time we stop. Terry, you mentioned different types of chargers. If you're out in the public and there's a direct charge, fast charge, DCFC charger, you can get up to 80% of a charge in 20 minutes. I think everybody feels like they're going to get in their car and drive 300 miles. And that's just not the way most people drive, right? You're going to drive some fraction of that. The charge you have will likely be fine. There will likely be circumstances where you need more of a charge. And again, a lot of that could happen overnight at your house. But I think we need to move away from equating an electric vehicle with a gas vehicle, and that they're going to our relationship with them is going to be exactly the same. It probably won't be, and quite frankly, it doesn't need to be.
Right, that's a really good answer. Oh, Peter was correcting me. Home charger is a level 2 for 8 hours. So yeah, they're definitely moving forward. I didn't actually know about that 80% in 20-minute charge. That's great. So,
yeah. But again, depends on having a car that can accept a charge that fast. So there are a couple different components. You have to be compatible, because your onboard charger will regulate the flow of electricity. So there can be chargers that want to charge you faster than you're capable of receiving. So there's.
Well, I got all kinds of corrections in the Q&A. Level 2 is the overnight. Level 1 would take all week. So obviously no one's got that anymore. And so Mark said the question is likely about level 3 and averages about 30 minutes. So that's great. Yeah, totally. And that is, so Elizabeth had a specific question for Ruth. Obstructionists to environmental change in our town will say, I check my phone for the air quality number and it is really good here in Greenwich. Yet we're using the great data from the American Lung Association and EPA say about Southwestern Connecticut to make the point that we need to limit to stroke engine gas blowers. Can you comment here on the efficacy of the air quality numbers commonly found on our weather apps and why those numbers may not reflect other pollution metrics like ozone?
So, certainly ozone is higher on hot, sunny days. Right. And so at other times you might be thinking like, it's fine. But there are days when our air quality is okay, but that's not the way that we want to be responding. And there are too many days with poor air quality in our state. And in fact, the Lung Association is pushing for stronger air qualities that are based on the newer science and better numbers. So even if we're kind of considered at what's considered okay for the parts per billion in the ambient air quality, the Lung Association would say that that's not actually the standard that we need to be at. And it should be more based on science and health. So I would say that the quality of the air that we breathe in Connecticut is not all right on those good days. It is okay. But in terms of kind of those, I think you were referencing the gas equipment that we have in addition to passenger vehicles and transportation. And we have a lot of resources about that. And I've heard a lot about the quality of pollution control. Those products as well are pretty concerning in terms of what the amount of pollution, because we're doing much better in terms of the pollution controls on all vehicles, or especially light duty vehicles, I should say. But those same pollution controls don't exist. And I'm not sure if that's what you were asking about, but I heard that. And that's another area that's pretty strong and can contribute to significant air quality issues. So I hope that was somewhat of an answer, and I'm happy to kind of work with you offline too, if that would be helpful.
So actually, yeah, that's a great segue. So I will send out the contact information for everyone on this panel. If you have follow-up questions, I will put up a recording. We do have a YouTube channel. I'm also going to do my best to actually break down the presentations and the talks also into individual shorter videos that might be a little bit easier to share when they're in 12-minute increments. And I'll also send out information for the Regulation Review Committee, their contact information so that you can reach out to them, as well as the towns that they represent. So if you've got a friend in one of their towns, like, everyone is welcome to contact legislators. Legislators do, however, generally listen a little bit more to their constituents. So if you know someone who lives in one of those towns, definitely give them a nudge to make a phone call. It is important that they know that that this is important to us. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for our panelists. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm so grateful. I hope that we all got a lot more clarity on what these proposed regulations are all about and how we can help get them adopted, and also additionally how the legislative process works a little bit more in Connecticut. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Father Bob. Deacon Art had to jump off. Thanks, Charles. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you, Terry.
Yeah, thank you. We'll do some follow-up very soon. Watch your inboxes. So
Thanks.
thank you.
Thanks. Take care.